Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's the Full 40 with Chris, Rob, and Whitley. Back to you on after a Villanova 2-0 week. Hello.
Is that the first time we've said that this season?
I know, it's been a while.
It might be. It might be.
It's been at least a month. But
First time this year.
Yeah, first time in 2023 is a fact. That is a truth fact. It is Monday, January 23rd. We're recording this at about 9:20 p.m. And we, believe it or not, despite a slow kind of week ahead, we have a lot to talk about. And we're pretty excited to discuss it. But we're going to jump in first and hand out our awards. The Alpha Dog of the Week and the Shaq Fit Man Play of the Week both go to the new GOAT in Villanova basketball history, Maddie Siegrist.
I was trying to make a goat noise, but it didn't really work.
Can you do the goat that just doesn't have that one vocal cord and screams on top of its lungs? You know what I'm talking about? You see those videos? I love those things. What is it, 2,410 or now in counting? Passing Shelley Pennefather as the all-time Villanova greatest scorer of all time. So it is what an accomplishment. We've been tracking it here on the podcast. We knew it was coming soon because she kept scoring 28 plus points a game. She had a measly 23, I think it was, against Creighton on Friday night.
Kind of weak, Maddie.
Yeah, I just got to get her shit together.
Try a little bit.
But now she's passed that record, which is kind of good, actually. It's a little bit of a monkey off the back, if you will. And now she could just go and win some games. And the team is in action tonight, if I'm not mistaken. Their team. I'm going to check.
No, they have a bye. They have the same bye as we do.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
They are, but their next game, sorry, that's what I meant to say.
As a man, I don't know why I said we.
Is against UConn. At UConn, they're ranked number 5 in the country. And so it's it's a tilt between the Big East two best teams. So that's huge, and a win there certainly puts Villanova pretty safely in the tournament conversation. In the tournament bracket, I should say, not in the conversation. They're very much in the conversation right now. They're trending towards like a 5-6 seed at the moment, but could with a couple big wins could play themselves even higher up than that. So Maddie Siegrist is not only winning from a scoring total standpoint in Villanova history, her team's winning games, and she's leading the charge. And so the best scorer in women's college basketball this season is part of a top 25 team. And we are obviously closely watching them as they continue their already a historic season for the program. So congratulations to Maddie. But I don't think that we can say enough about how awesome she's been.
It was watching that game, first off, just to give the team props, like we came out and jumps down Creighton's throat. It was like 26-6 in the first quarter, and it was very much kind of over. So it was like cool. It was just like really cool watching that game and just seeing the way that they were clicking. They looked like your classic Villanova team. Realistically, the first half, the Maddie that was the best player on the court was Maddie Burke. I think Maddie Burke went 5 for 5 from deep. She was absolutely killing it. Lucy Olson was on triple double watch. Did not get it, but I mean, Lucy Olson's a dog. I've spoke about Lucy in this podcast. Lucy's my favorite player on the team. What I thought was cool, though, was you could tell Maddie was getting a little bit tight, just trying to get the bucket to get it over with. And then we made just like some stupid plays. And then eventually Maddie got into this groove where I think it was like 3 straight. They gave it to her in the high post. She turned, shot over, and just hit them all. And once that first one in, I was like, oh, she's about to get the rattle off the record. And it just very quickly, it may have been like 3 buckets in like 4 possessions. And then boom, the record was just done. So shout out to Maddie. Shout out to the whole women's teams. It was, they're a pretty good team. And with a weak UConn just due to injuries, I don't know. There might
There's a
be
chance.
there might be an upset. Another one actually, because we already did that last year.
Absolutely. Well, I got nothing to add. And a PSA for our listeners here. I'm several drinks in. So this could be an interesting podcast for the fans of Rob. So just bear with me here.
All right, so we're gonna stick with the awards thing. We're gonna hand out the Pass the Fucking Ball Award of the week. And that award goes to every single human being involved in that St. John's Villanova debacle.
Terrible.
Monday
Holy
night.
shit.
That game was atrocious. And by the way, we say that after winning, right? Like, I can't imagine what a St. John's fan feels.
Oh my God.
They packed the
Holy
garden
cow.
was absolutely packed. Okay. St. John's fans are sitting there, they're thinking themselves, we just beat UConn. We're getting our shit together. We're going to make a run now to the NCAA tournament. And all week, all the St. John's fans could post about was how, even though Villanova isn't having their normal Villanova season, that it was our game that was going to be kind of like a season-defining moment for them, because they needed to get over our hump, the mental block of Villanova, to really prove themselves that they are a tournament caliber team. They just really viewed it that way. And they scored 49 points against, in my watch of this, the worst Villanova defensive team in 10 years.
It wasn't great. It was easily the worst basketball game I've ever paid to see. Like, bar none. I was glad we won, but it was hilarious. It was actually really funny being in the building, because there were audible groans and everybody was looking around at one another as the second half progressed, being like, are we really watching this? Like, is this the product we're getting? Like, St. John's fans, like you said, they were up, they were excited because they were winning, and it just got so ugly. Everybody was like, okay, like someone I guess is going to win this game. It was embarrassing.
I wish that Nova shot guy would make some a highlight reel with like that because there was like a handful of possessions where the ball just went back and forth, and it was like it was watching like a CYO game. And
so bad.
A-Ray posted like a highlight reel of a CYO game being like, this is what Villanova and St. John's looks like.
So
I missed that.
It was so bad.
It was really something. Yes,
But,
for all those who watched it, like, bless your soul.
Yeah, but hey,
we're
won.
on the right side of it. Yep.
A win's a win. Back to 500, baby. Here we go.
Back to 500.
Here we go.
Oh boy. And obviously earlier in the week, before we did that podcast with Randy and Ashley Howard, we obviously escaped versus Georgetown, but turns out that was big because kind of need to get rolling now. So look, the reality of the situation is we're not going to spend a ton of time on the X's and O's here for a little while here. We got a bunch of different things to talk about, more broad based. We're going to get into that in just a second. But like, if you're wondering, when are they going to, like, are they going to really do like a big coverage of these games? I'm not going to bore you with the details of a bad basketball game, candidly. And we're just like, we're like right now, like, we're not in the NCAA tournament picture, and that's not really against the team or anything. It's just kind of like math and statistics.
It's just factual. We are not on the bubble. We are not in the tournament. We're just not there.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I guess at 500 you qualified for the NIT. I don't even know, but I don't even think we get into that right now. So the reality of the situation is that this team, we want them to win the games ahead, etc. But in order to get even like really back into a conversation where we could really be talking about that, they need to go like 8-3 down the stretch here. Like, and that includes games at Creighton, at Marquette, at Providence. Like,
it's not happening.
It's just really hard to get there, right? Like, so the reality of the situation is we're not going to spend too much time living and dying on that. What we want to see right now is players getting better, our seniors perform more consistently, Cam continue to work on his, continue to play well and play Villanova basketball and work on his draft stock, Mark Armstrong getting better. Like, these are the types of things that we want to see out of the Villanova program right now. And if you put those pieces together and those start to happen in sync, and this team starts to click, then we might be able to start having conversations again. But right now, it's just like 10-10, like just try and enjoy each game for what it is and root for the team to win, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, not much to say. Like, the way I look at it is like I'm very much just heads down, as you said, on individual players. We have, I think, Providence, Marquette, Creighton next. If we were to somehow sweep all three of those, then I'd start to be like, all right, well, maybe we'll like poke around and start thinking a little bit more. But one, unlikely, very unlikely. Two, it's just like, yeah. So until that happens, at this stage, it's just look for the positives and like the individual growth moments, as you mentioned, Chris. Beyond that, just like we'll see where we stand realistically after the UConn game. Maybe we've gone 7-4, and it's like, all right, well, maybe a good Big East tournament showing, and there's something to talk about. But until that point, it's just all prognosticating, and there's, I think, other more interesting things we can be talking about.
Yeah. So on the topic of more interesting things, I think this is the one thing I really want to talk about here. So we had this conversation with Randy Foy and Ashley Howard last week about NIL and Friends of Nova, and I encourage everyone to go listen to the podcast. They talked about the ins and outs of Friends of Nova and how you can help Villanova athletes writ large. Obviously, our podcast is basketball focused, so we talked a lot more about basketball, but they talked about how Friends of Nova is an NIL collective for all the athletes at Villanova. Great, right? And one of the topics of conversation that kind of came up in there was kind of like how Villanova is going to try and do it their own unique way. We know that we cannot compete from a dollars and cents standpoint with these big state schools, especially like these football schools where they're like, where Florida's giving some guy like millions of dollars, right? Like that's just like crazy stuff that we're never going to be that type of school, but how they want to offer experiences for Villanova fans, get unprecedented access to the athletes, and really like develop something along those lines so that when people are paying the players, because that's essentially what it is, right? Like just to call a spade here.
That's basically, yeah.
Right.
You're making a donation, or as they termed it, however, and then that gets funneled to the player. So yes, as a fan, you're paying the players.
Right. And it's actually more direct than you'd pay a professional athlete.
And you can choose who you want it to go to, right? For the most part. For the most part.
There's a concept that they talked about making sure that the floor is at least someone, some level of a floor for everyone given, based on the type of team. So like they talked about how the Villanova basketball team has everyone 1 to 14 has a floor that they're all going to hit. But so you're going to pay the players. Now, one of the constant refrains in college basketball, when it comes to the concept of criticizing a player, and we've done it here on this podcast, is, well, you can't really criticize an unpaid 18 to 23-year-old kid, right? Like,
yeah.
Right. And so
you just feel weird doing it, right? It's
it
seems strange. Like,
or you should feel weird doing it.
Feel weird doing it.
Right. If you don't feel weird doing it, you're the weird one, right?
Yeah. In theory, like whoever it is out there busting their ass for the school, for your enjoyment. Yeah.
Right.
We all know the refrain.
Yeah. So you have all of that as a given. Now all of a sudden, right? Like you add this paying concept to it all, and it's like it appears right now that from what I can see is that there's a little bit of new battle lines being drawn here. And it's interesting because this is playing out simultaneously across the collegiate landscape. And what we've seen in the last like few weeks in college basketball in particular is these moments that have boiled over, if you will. And you're kind of seeing fans pitted against other fans, pitted against like maybe sometimes media members in certain instances, but pitted against the program. And I say that writ large, like program, i.e. Athletic department, coaches, staff, whatever, players, alumni of that program, right? And school administrations, right? Like, and it's like an interesting situation because I'm not saying every fan is playing the players, but every fan is paying for TV packages. They're paying for tickets in a lot of cases. They're paying for they're paying for other things, right? Like donations to the universities, what have you. Enter this element of the NIL element, and fans seem to be vocalizing themselves. Obviously, social media is a powerful tool to kind of get this in there, but like are vocalizing themselves. And there's been notable pushback in these instances. And I could think of 7 schools off the top of my head, including ours, that have all gone through this recently, including Kentucky. You remember there was that sign from the Kentucky fan at Rupp Arena that said "Go to Texas," right? Like, it's like basically because Calipari, they weren't happy with the program's performance. Indiana had a couple notable instances lately. A fan sent a note to a player that the player posted on their Instagram account, and a Barstool Indiana account kind of like said something kind of half attacking the team, and a bunch of players on the team kind of attacked that. You saw it, you're seeing it with UConn, who has undergone like a 2-5 stretch to start big, or since the new year or whatever. And all of a sudden there's been a boiling over there. You've seen it with us. I mean, we were kind of in the middle of it with the space that we hosted a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
You see it with St. John's, whose fans got a ton of commentary. There's like back and forth over the coach. And obviously Georgetown has been very much the case, where you've had players and people holding up signs saying "Save Georgetown basketball." You've had security go up to them at games, take away their signs, and be like, "Sorry, Patrick Ewing and the coaching staff has demanded that we take the sign from you." Like, there's been all of this stuff that's happened, which is all kind of like things that we've seen before.
I was going to say, what you're describing is actually like not that abnormal for what has existed over the past few years, basically since like the social media age. Like, people are able to directly interact with players, so like that has become much more of the norm. But I think what becomes more interesting is then when you introduce the element, or you assume that we're going to expand this NIL is paying for players relationship, then this starts to get interesting. If like, well, like, do fans have the right to be doing that? Like, previously it was like, hands off, like you didn't contribute to anything, so you don't have a right to say anything. But now it's like, and even this happened on our last podcast, where it's like kind of alluded to, of like, well, you're contributing to the players. Like, does that change what me as a fan is actually reasonable to do? Like, am I able to interact with them in a different way? Like, should I expect something different? I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Like, I don't think it's necessarily come to light yet, but it certainly starts to raise those questions, right?
Yeah. And it really raises an interesting conversation, because you're basically saying, hey, pay astronomical donations to even have the right to buy tickets, pay astronomical ticket prices, pay more and more money for TV packages, because you can't just have TV now. You have to buy the extra upgrade for ESPN Plus, for CBS Sports Network, for FS2, and for Fox Sports Live Go app, or whatever the hell it's called, right? Like, you need all this other stuff to be able to watch a basketball game.
Yeah.
Right. And on top of that, give these players money because we have to stay competitive, which is all reasonable ask, in my opinion. But if you want to keep seeing good recruiting at your school and see success, whatever. And oh, by the way, if you do all of that and success still doesn't happen, you can't talk about it, right? Like, and that's that. There's going to have to be a different. That sell doesn't work here, right? Like, there has to be.
It's different. It's different when it was like previously. It was like, hey, donate to the athletic department, which everybody kind of always assumed. You didn't want to say it, but you're like, I don't know, some of that's contributing to recruiting. Like, it's indirectly getting us better players on campus and getting a better team. But now it's like, oh no, make a direct contribution basically to recruit these players. It does start to change the dynamic of what fans think about. Because when you're just donating to the athletic department, it's kind of like, okay, I guess I can't pinpoint a certain thing, or I can't criticize a certain player or a certain element. But when you're pointing it at one element, I don't know, it starts to change the calculus a little bit.
So I'm gonna like take the other side of this. I kind of am there. I'm still a little bit like figuring out where I fit on this. I think when we think about like what we're paying for as part of the NIL, we're not paying them to play. Like that's just not what it is. You're paying for access to access to them, access to their name, image, and likeness. When I donate to the LLC, I'm paying to potentially interact, like Randy and Ashley said, at like a golf outing with that. And you're also paying them to build the war chest, as they were saying, and go out and recruit higher quality players. In a way, obviously recruiting higher quality players, in theory, should lead to adding or to getting to performance on the court, better players, better results, all that fun stuff. But I think it's interesting because we're not necessarily paying them to produce. Right. And I think there's like a level of, and I'm sure Colin Gillespie would love to hear this word, entitlement that comes from, and I think it's like, I mean, we can go back just historically and look at it, but social media has made players more accessible in just full stop. Because of that, you're able to voice your opinion more easily to them. Now, not only can you voice your opinion more easily to them, people feel because they're paying into it, they're going to be able to say more to them because, oh, well, I'm part of the reason, you know, every player that as a Villanova makes $10,000 base. I don't know what the number is, but whatever it may be, they're all part of that base. I have the ability to then give my opinion and, you know, harp on the players. Yeah. Obviously, you have the ability to give your opinion. I think where the line crosses, and this is what we're trying to figure out, where is that demarcation? I think where the line is because everything is access is so much. Because access is so important and we have the ability to connect with them, the athletes are now able to hear this. So when we hear this negativity, it's holy shit, if I'm getting this negativity and yeah, I'm getting like, if the access that they're given leads to negativity, that's where you're losing recruits. Because why would I want to be accessible to negativity? And I think that's where a lot of the like other side of it comes in of like, well, you're being entitled because just because you have access to them, I guess like I'm thinking about it from a recruiting standpoint, why would I want to go to a place that there's negativity happening at? And I'm still like, but I don't know what side I fit on.
There's negativity everywhere though. Like, I mean,
yes,
saying like Villanova is like, oh, the fans are negative. I mean, that's just totally ignoring. Like, if you go to Kentucky, you go to any other school recruiting again, it's gonna be the same thing too.
And so I think that in a microscope, it's not just Villanova. We're seeing it at 7 schools, like Chris mentioned. There's probably another 20 that are smaller that we're seeing it at. I think that's just an issue of NIL as a whole. It's not a Villanova specific thing.
I think that's just a people issue.
Yeah, it's just a people thing.
But people, man.
But now people feel more
totally
able to give that because of
it. Right. Yeah. And so this has been like an interesting discussion, right? Like, because it's like, well, where is that line, right? Like, if I want to post a tweet, right, while I'm watching a game in a moment, like, especially if I'm sitting at home, if I'm at the game, I'm gonna cheer whatever I'm gonna do, right? Like, yell at the ref, you know, it's all part of the game, right? But like, if I'm at home posting tweets and whatever, I'm just firing off takes, like just like everybody else, right? Like, I might say like, you know, oh, God damn it, Slater, why'd you kick that ball out of bounds? Right. Like, but that to me is not like a hate on Brandon Slater or introducing negativity on Brandon Slater.
Where it changes is when you say at Brandon Slater, what the fuck was that? Yeah. Doing that. Because that's different than what are you trying to accomplish from that? And I think that's where that line is when you are targeting a player, that's where it changes. I think coaches should be able to be targeted, like Calipari, go to Texas. I don't care. But like when you're targeting a player, I think that's when it begins to be like, all right, well, what are we doing here? Because what's the expected outcome from that? Right. Brandon Slater's going to read that tweet and be like, damn, I should have done that. Yeah, he already fucking knows that.
Right. Oh man, we're asking. Bloody and I have had to have this conversation many times in other unrelated forums. I agree with the sentiment. You should not. I totally agree with you, Willie, 100%. But man, we are so far asking a lot of the average population to exhibit some level of reasonableness
Completely.
and like have some level of decorum when they're interacting with people like from, you know, essentially across the country in a virtual landscape. There's just like, I agree,
Completely.
but like there's no way it's going to happen.
And on top of this, college basketball is really kind of like, to me, outside of being like a quarterback in a football team, like a lot of the players around the these football programs are kind of like, I don't want to say nameless, but like I hate to say it, but like there's 80 people on a football team, right? Like at some point in time, like
100 plus for some of the big ones.
that guy who committed a holding penalty, like you forget that guy's name. Like this is part of the deal. Like he might end up being a multi-millionaire NFL player, but you don't remember who did that. Oh, yeah, it was 73, holding, right? Like, but in basketball, there's 10 players on the court at a time, and there's about 8 or 9 per team who actually play.
Yeah.
So everyone knows all their names. And at these basketball schools, which I rattled off a bunch of Northeastern basketball schools because those are the ones I'm more exposed to. But like these are the guys. These are the guys who are like your top 15 most notable people on campus, right? Like, and so it is a difficult situation because when you're watching the game, when you watch these people play 40 games a year, 30 plus games a year for 4 years, like you almost start to develop almost like you watch their media hits, whatever, you almost start to feel like you're developing a one-sided relationship with them. And so it's just an interesting dynamic in basketball in particular, where like an individual play, the player who made the play or did not make the play. And it's right there in front of you.
And I think that's kind of the issue where it's like, you feel like you said you're developing this one-sided relationship. It's like, but it's not both sided.
Yeah.
And that's
correct.
the thing.
Right.
And so then to the person on the other side, it's like, I have no relationship with this person and I'm dealing with that. And once again, to Rob's point, we are asking 50% of Americans, 50% of college basketball fans, 80% of college, like, to use restraint and to have that. And that's just not going to happen. But that's just, when you look at it from the athlete side, that's just what it is. They're now, because there's this perceived relationship, because you have paid for a good or service, you have paid for a photo op with them, they now have the ability to then chastise you on a level that's like, all right, well, we're not being critical of me. You're just kind of being mean in some situations. And that's where it's like, all right, come on. But I felt like I'm trying to play both sides because I feel like I know where you guys both stand, but like, it's just a weird situation.
Well, here's the thing.
A weird situation. Absolutely.
I don't find, like, look, this podcast, just like Twitter account and the podcast in general, has always kind of like somewhat pissed off the most positive people in the fan base, and also definitely pissed off the more negative Nancy's in the fan base, right? Like, I think if you were to put us on a continuum of 0 to 10, 0 being most negative, 10 being most positive, I think most people put us at like 6. I don't know. I could be totally off in that. 7, right? Like I don't know exactly where we would stand. I think people would say they don't really ever go there. We're not like Skip Bayless. We don't do any of that type of thing. But we also aren't always going to be sunshine and rainbows all the time. We've called out bad play in the past. We've called out what we felt was a Hall of Famer coach making poor decisions on playing time and whatever. We do that all the time, right? But there has to be a space for that, because right now I can tell you that college basketball is in a very weird position, right? Like, there is a situation playing out where college basketball has increasingly become a niche sport. Now, the fans who love it, right? Like, are very invested in college basketball, as are we. But like the people who, there's a lot of people who just, college basketball is something that happens for 1 month of a year.
Yep.
And really, honestly, 2.5 weeks of a year. And that's all college basketball is to a lot of people. And continuing down this path of telling fans or yelling at fans for how they react at a game on social media and whatever is going to turn people away.
Totally.
And so like, as college basketball needs to figure this out. They need to set new boundaries. I don't know who sets those boundaries, but like it's going to kind of be like the general public coming to some type of consensus of setting these boundaries right? Like, and saying, okay, here's the line, here's where you cross it, but the line it might be a little bit further away than when it was 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And then how do you advise your players and your coaching staff on how to handle and manage that? Because I can tell you in the professional world, right? Like what I say is like, okay, the players who are going to play professionally, like probably need a different level of coaching and expertise to come to them to manage that, because they're definitely going to deal with it after they graduate college. Like you think it's bad at Villanova, which it's not, right? Like genuinely, honestly, it's not bad at Villanova. Like, but go to play for the Lakers and you're going to see how it gets really fucking ugly, right? Like really quickly, right? Like go play for the 76ers and you're going to see where it can go, right?
What are you talking about? The fan base is really casual.
Philadelphia fans are very much known for
super nice, like very tolerant,
very even keeled,
like,
even keeled fans.
They like to see development, gradual growth, all that good stuff.
Right.
All I'm gonna say is we had the process and you guys killed it.
So you're going to have to deal with that. Now, a player that's kind of like back end of NIL, that's kind of only making a couple shekels because they're wearing Villanova on the front of their jersey.
Shekels. Wow.
Yeah. And is there not going to be playing professionally anywhere, whatever, probably doesn't really need to hear this stuff. And kind of like where we saw an example of this of late was at that Georgetown game when Chris Arcidiacono subbed in. And there was audible booing, and it came from the student section, and it came from other fans in the arena, and there was a whole conversation that played out on Twitter and social media and message boards and whatever of like the appropriateness of that. So I think a lot of Willie, before you jump, I think a lot of people were booing Neptune over the decision.
100%.
But it really did come across, like if we're being honest, it came across like they were booing Arch.
So that's my thing. Maybe I just like misunderstood it, but it sucked because it was Arch. But in my head, when I saw it happen, it was because Neptune took out Cam and put in Arch. It wasn't booing Arch. It was the decision of that move that I felt like it was happening. But obviously, because Arch was being put in and the boo birds came very strongly. I don't know. It happened and I was like, ooh, this isn't great. But also I was like cackling during that because I was like, what is this decision? Yeah. And I understood the decision was to get your ball handlers in and all that stuff. But just in that vacuum, you're like, this is an interesting decision that we're doing
But you should be able to criticize.
Yes, you should be able to criticize that decision 1,000%.
This was a crazy take on Twitter. Well, people were like so upset with this, and they're posting like fucking LinkedIn and shit like that. And I'm like, stop. If you want to play or coach in major college sports, and you expect the fan base to not criticize you in one iota, you should pick a different fucking profession. That's absolute insanity. Because guess what? There's no way to sit in the stands and be like, oh, Kyle, I politely disagree with your decision. Like, no, that's fucking part of the program. You're there, you get the accolades, you get the upside, but guess what? You also get some of the challenges that come along with it. And I think booing in a stadium on a coaching decision is a very different thing than sending a written letter to a player or sending somebody some like shit DM. Like those are very different things. And like,
by the way,
booing in a stadium is just like, that's just part of the fucking game. If you can't deal with it, don't play the game, period.
Yeah. I would believe, by the way, that the DMing probably does happen. We haven't seen our players posting this.
I'm not saying it doesn't.
But like, let's just be clear here. Here's a line that I'm drawing right now. If you're booing Chris Arch or sending him or tagging him in social media and whatever, you're a fucking moron. Okay. Like, let's just be clear here. You're a fucking idiot because whether you're a student, alum, paying millions of dollars, paying Chris Arcidiacono $20,000 directly, whatever it may be, like you don't get the right to boo him because let's just set the table here, right? Like Chris Arcidiacono, and I don't really want to get into the X's and O's here, but like, I don't want to get into this again. But like he is who he is, right? And he is earning playing time on this team because of his effort and intensity and IQ, whatever, right? Like I'll just say that, right? If you're booing the decision to play him over Cam Whitmore, who is going to be a lottery pick, that's not only okay, that's fucking very reasonable. But it is hard in that environment to determine what exactly is going on. And I bet you if you were to pull a sample of 100 fans who were at that game, it wouldn't be 100-0 who thought that they were booing the decision. I think you'd get some type of sampling, right? Like,
oh, sure, yeah, totally.
So like that is kind of where this whole thing becomes it boiled over then. It's boiled over a couple times now, right? Like that's where, like, okay, I do think it is to a degree on fans to have those conversations with other fans to say there are lines, right? Like yes, we're asking a lot of fans, but like there's also a little bit to say there are lines. Now, there's like the quote, those who mind don't matter, or those who matter don't mind.
Like to be clear, right? It's not like we're discussing a situation when every time Arch touched the ball, people booed. Like that. Yeah. That's like a very clear, like, oh, I'm attacking the player. Like that was not the situation here. Like those are two very different things. If that was the case, I'd be like, guys, that's unreasonable. Like I don't understand what we're doing here. What we're discussing is there's a coaching decision. People disagreed with it. They expressed it. It moved on. It was a one-time thing. Period. Like that's it. Those are two different things.
Now, by the way, over the course of time, criticism of Jay kind of became like a little bit of like I'd say as he got more successful, it became a little bit, I don't want to say acceptable, but it was almost like the program could just ride above it because it was just like, he's so good that like, you know, any real criticism is obviously taken as just a critique of what everyone understands to be a good coach.
Yeah.
Right? We were criticizing B pluses, not being A's. Yes. That's what we were doing.
Exactly.
So it's like at the end of the day, you're like, all right, whatever.
Now, Neptune has had a rocky start, right? Like I think that would go by his own admission, right? Like some of that I think is expectations of coming in. And by the way, expectations that Villanova 100% fed into. Right, like every interview, everything feels the same. It almost feels like Jay Wright was never here, right? Like it was all that type of line of talking, and we're going to be, you know, whatever. Like I think fans understood that there'd probably be lumps while we were getting injuries sorted out and whatever. But like, yeah, I think this has gone worse than everybody expected, and so some of it is a miss of perceived expectations. But it's also been rocky from like decision making and whatever. Now, reasonable fans do not believe that Kyle Neptune should be fired, right? Like nobody who has any sense of reason thinks that way. No reasonable fan thinks that Kyle Neptune should be in the discussion for a hot seat a year from now, maybe 2 years from now. But like, again, there has to be a space. There has to be a space. Yeah, fair. There has to be a space for a coach that's making, I guess, $2+ million a year. I don't know. We don't know exact numbers, but Jay probably was making up near 4. I have to imagine that
Jay got up over like 6 at the end of it. Yeah,
they're not paying Kyle what they pay Jay.
Yeah,
right. Like, or if they are, they're fucking stupid. But like, and that's not against Kyle or anything. It's just like Hall of Famer versus 37-year-old second-year head coach, right? Like, but like, there has to be an acceptable level of criticism here between the fans and the coach, right? Like that just has to be. That has to be. And like, if you're telling people you can't boo or you can't shit on players, right? Like they need an outlet. And so Kyle, by the way, Kyle has not said a singular word. To his credit, it's not like Kyle's
been a class act through all this.
He's been a class act through all of this. So this is not coming from Kyle. This is not directed at Kyle, but this is just kind of like a, hey, everybody out there, like there has to be a space for criticism here, right? Like it hasn't gone well. Like we have to be able to say that, right? Like now that doesn't mean that it will always go not well. That doesn't mean it will always not go not well, right? Like, so it's, I don't know if I got my double negatives right there, but like there has to be a space there. And that doesn't mean that everyone who boos or criticizes or whatever thinks that he should be gone the next day. But there has to be an understanding that there's reasonable people here on both sides of the equation or multiple sides of the equation that are going to share their opinions when they don't like a particular decision that's made.
Yeah.
So, as a quick aside, when do you think the last time a Villanova team was booed was?
I mean, I distinctly remember booing while I was a student. And I distinctly remember it being like, honestly, Malcolm Grant comes to mind. I don't know why
Okay.
that's coming to mind for me. But Jay wouldn't play him because, and we've seen the videos and whatever, but Jay wouldn't play him because he wasn't fitting into the culture. That was the reason why. Like we didn't understand that, and Jay defended him in
He's
public.
not bitter. He's not bitter.
No, he's not bitter at all. Maybe the least bitter person of all time.
Yeesh.
Still obviously posting about it 15 years after the fact. Neither here nor there, right? Like fans were actively booing Jay about not playing him, right? Like they were cheers, or he's not the right word, but chants to say we want Malcolm. I very distinctly remember the student section loudly when we were losing games, yelling, "We want Malcolm!" And Jay at some points begrudgingly put him in, kind of responsive to that. I have to imagine there was booing. There was definitely booing at the end of the 9-10 season. There was definitely booing at the end of the 10-11 season, the way those seasons played out. I have to imagine there was booing the 12-13 season, right? And I can't imagine that there was many happy fans when we lost to Columbia in the
That was
in the-
12-13, 11-12.
11-12 is what I meant to say, was the 13 and 19 season.
I
And
don't
then-
remember booing in 11-12. Nothing comes up.
Was it just an acceptance?
I think it was an
of-
acceptance thing.
Yeah, but that's kind of the worry, right? Like booing fans are fans who are paying customers who are there and give a shit, right?
Yeah.
Like you look at Georgetown now, like
No one's booing because no one's there.
right,
That's so true.
yeah, right. Like the worst fan is the fan who is silent because they don't give a fuck anymore, right? Like that's where Georgetown's at, right? Like
Georgetown fans are broken. Like, let's be very real about
Very
this.
true.
very much so. I mean, I talk to Georgetown fans all the time. There is genuine worry that the school is not going to fire Patrick Ewing at the end of the season, right? Like they're like genuinely like, I just can't believe that they're going to do this until they do it. Like I just won't believe it until it happens, right? Like this is a coach who's lost like 30 plus Big East games in a row, right? Like.
Crazy.
But that's where their fans are at, and they're like silent little pockets of Twitter, right? Like, but they get a couple thousand, a smattering of people going to games, right? Like Villanova, it's one of those weird things where you want fans to behave a certain way, but you definitely don't want them to not show up.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
where does that take you, right? Like because if the fans don't show up, and whatever, then TV executives presume that they don't get eyeballs, which then leads to getting the shittiest game times, right? Like you see it with DePaul, right? Like Georgetown still has a name, so they still get some draw. But you see it with DePaul, right? Like over the years, DePaul has just gotten relegated to like every other games on CBS Sports Network. They're on FS2. They're at 9:00 at night, 9:30 at night. Like they're kind of scheduled as well, our contract says we have to air these games, so here's the DePaul game, right? Like that's what happens over time. You don't want to go that route, right? Like because the fans stop booing at a certain time and stop showing up later. So that not only happens from the virtue of not having success, but it also happens by virtue of telling fans what they can and cannot do.
Yeah. So I think the takeaway from all this is more to come. But we, as a podcast, think fans should be able to express themselves to a reasonable extent within reason, within respect of the players, etc.
Respect of humans, right?
Respect the human, yep.
I think that's fair. It's fair. But can you voice your opinions? Like that should be an expectation, I think, of major college sports, but do so in a somewhat respectful manner of the people, because remind you, at the end of the day, they're people you're interacting with, right? You wouldn't say you want to come for Chris. Maybe you would come for Chris and be like, "Hey, man, you suck at your job." So like,
Oh, no. I mean, we get that all the time.
I mean, that's true. But they wouldn't come to you face to face and say it because nobody's done that, at least as far as I know.
Yeah, fair. All right. So let's talk a little bit about though we were just starting to have that conversation around like the winning and and all of that. And one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of weeks is kind of the culture of Villanova basketball come to light, right? Like I would say we won that St. John's game on culture. I would say we won the Georgetown game on culture. I would say that the outpouring of support for the team and all of that, whether it came across as kind of like attacking fans or whatever, the defense of the other players of the program and whatever from former players, Colin Gillespie, Jalen Brunson, Alan Ray, Randy Floyd, everyone's been out there kind of singing the same and beating the same drum of being like, give these guys patience, give these guys time, like whatever. All of that, that's all culture, right? Like, and so I guess my question here is the argument for when we hired Neptune was to keep the culture going, right? Like you bring in someone from outside, they're going to do their own thing. They got their own way of operating. You can't expect Nate Oates, and just using him as an example, you can't expect Nate Oates to come in from wherever he is and come into Villanova and be like, okay, we're going to do things the Villanova culture way. Like we're going to play full 40 minutes of Villanova basketball. No, he's got his own mantras and things that he's about, and he's got his own style of play and basketball and whatever, and like he's going to come with all of that, right? And that's just using him again, just using that as an example. So you go in and like everyone's like, well, why didn't Villanova, this top 10 program of all time, like go out and do a full-blown national coaching search? Well, like there was the argument that a continuity of culture, whatever. So where I guess I want to get to here is, does the culture beget the winning, or does the winning beget the culture, right? Like in other words, like what is more important, not only to you, but what is more important to establish first that then creates something down the road? Is kind of like the question that we're getting at. And we might get to an answer somewhere in the middle that's like a little unsatisfying, but let's at least have that conversation.
Willie, do you want to go?
Me?
Go
Yeah,
for
go
it.
ahead. Willie, go ahead.
Okay. So you said something at the very end, which is like different. Culture, I think culture begets winning. That's what I think. I also think no one gives a shit if you're not winning. So what that means is you can have the culture all you want, but if you're not winning at a high level, it's not spoken about. Villanova over the last 10 years or last 20 years, however long you feel like the Villanova culture has been a huge thing, let's just say the last decade, because we've had an amazing last decade. Villanova is not the only school that's had continuity and a strong culture. Davidson had a strong culture. No one's given a shit about Davidson the last 10 years outside of the context of Steph Curry. Yeah. And that was 15 years prior. But every other time Davidson came up, it was because of Steph Curry. Bob McKillop was the coach of Davidson for 30 years. It was the same culture. He knew how to run. They ran the same offense for 30 years. He came in, he had a set of standards. They weren't winning at the level that Villanova was winning, and no one really cared. And once again, the only time they ever cared in the last 30 years was when there was a man named Steph Curry who made them start winning. That's so in my head, culture begets winning, because you can't just roll out the ball and say, we're going to start winning. That's not how it works. That's what Kentucky had tried to do. That's what a lot of teams that throw play teams together and just try to figure out what to do. You can't just roll it out there and say you're going to start winning. What happens is you roll the ball out there and maybe the talent takes over, but when things get tough, eventually it's going to crumble. So you need to have some kind of culture. And culture also, to be clear, doesn't necessarily mean a 15, 30-year built thing that's consistent. That's consistent. Yep. Culture can be found within a year. Yes. It can be found within maybe not 3 weeks, but like in the summer going into there. You can find where your culture is for that team and hold on to that. But at the end of the day, no one cares in the way that we're thinking about culture and the longer term thing. No one cares if it doesn't mean winning. Otherwise, not even using Davidson, but Navy, Army, all these service programs that have phenomenal cultures, people would talk about them, but they don't, because at the end of the day, they're not winning. And so at the end of the day, it's winning culture that matters. If Villanova had lost all these games that our culture wins, like St. John's, Georgetown, where we did what we do and we would keep winning, if we had lost those games, no one's talking about the culture being the one that wins, that loses the games for us or wins it. It's just like, at the end of the day, it's winning culture that matters. And that's where I'm at.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, literally, just to reemphasize this point, the only cultures that people talk about are the top 10 programs. Nobody talks about the cultures of programs 75 to 100 because nobody fucking cares. If Villanova didn't become a perennial powerhouse in the last decade, nobody would talk about the Villanova culture. It would just be like, oh, it's a nice school. They had a good run in the 80s and they made a Final Four in 09. Like, okay, cool. Like, that's it. And I think the other point I very much want to agree with is the idea of culture, and this is getting a little bit away from Beli's question, but the idea of culture being a dynamic thing. Culture isn't a static thing. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not like, this is what Villanova culture is. It's these three things, and we execute them these three ways. No, like, think about culture in a broader context too. Culture evolves, culture changes. Like, Villanova culture and what people associate with that has evolved as well as the style of basketball has changed, as the assistant coaches have changed throughout time. And like, they emphasize different things. And those different things that they emphasize ultimately get ingrained in the players and what gets executed on the court. And ultimately what gets executed on the court is what the fans see, and what the fans see is what the coaches talk about, and what the coaches talk about ultimately comes to culture. And that's what we ultimately point to as saying, that's the Villanova culture. But that has very much evolved over time. My other point that I want to say is the idea of I don't even know. I lost my train of thought, to be honest. Come back to me on this. I'll get it back. It's too many drinks in, so you gotta come back. It's 10 o'clock at night, guys. I got
was
laid
about
off
to make
today,
this
so.
awesome point, and then
I could see it coming though. I was like,
It was
no clue what he's
so.
about to
If
say.
you come back to me in like 30 seconds, I'll probably get it.
I
but,
feel like this is like Mario Kart, and I just used the ghost, and it stole your great point from you.
It literally, it's just gone. It's totally gone. I'll come back to it. I gotta search through some old texts or some shit. It's fine.
I'm gonna take a little bit of a contrary, but I agree. Like, no one cares if the culture doesn't actually beget winning, but the culture begets the winning, right? Like I just want to like really make that point clear, right? Like, so I agree. It's not static. It evolves over time. I think a lot of the conversation that we had kind of in our last segment was about how the culture of the program is going to need to evolve for the new era, right? Like,
I remember what it was.
Go ahead, Rob. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
No.
This is my other point. So this drives me crazy when people talk about how special Villanova culture is, and they talk about special cultures fucking anywhere else. What is Villanova culture? Villanova culture is like, work hard, like bust your ass for 40 minutes, dive on the ground. Like, that's pretty much it. People are like, oh, this goes back to Bly's point about the coaching search. It's like, oh, we've got to bring in, look, I'm not trying to knock Kyle. We just found Kyle a lot on this podcast, but it's like, oh, we had to go in-house to find the Villanova culture. Like, no offense, but like, these aren't revolutionary concepts. Like, anybody can come in and basically put their spin on work hard, play for 40 minutes, have a good attitude. Are those good traits that I think actually do support a good culture? 100%. Can anyone else coming in from the outside execute on those cultural elements and play into that? Yes, they can, if they are a smart coach and can play to the fan base. And if they can't, that's actually probably just a poor coaching fit for Villanova, because they're not meant to be a good major college coach who can play and like pander, call it what it is, can pander to the alumni base, because you have to do that a little bit.
To your point, real quick, it is very funny because I think on the walls it's play hard, play together, play smart, play with pride. Like
Is that a CYO? Like, come
no
on.
coach should come in and say anything but that. You
Yeah,
know,
like play as an individual. Like, what are we talking about here? No, try part of the time. Like, this is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
If you could play 20 out of 40 minutes well, that's good enough. And like no one's gonna say, I get that point. I get the point. Here's where I think separates. Here's what I think. Well, like is you need something as a program to stake your ground. Like what differentiates you? Like when we're talking to recruits, when you're talking to fans, whatever, what differentiates you from somewhere else? And the thing, most common refrain that I hear is that, and it's in the media, and it's from talking to other players, it's from talking to former players, it's from talking to the interviews that we've had over the years, from Chuck to A-Ray to Randy to now Colin to Chef to whatever, is that a lot of programs, places talk about culture and say it's important to them.
Yep.
The difference for Villanova is how intensely it is lived. Like it's everything that they do, right? Like, look, some of that is marketing, right? Like, I get that, right? Like, some of it is the players and the coaches and whatever staying on brand, if you will. But I do think there's something to be said for the fact that Kyle Neptune struggled, was 8-10 at the time of the recording, or 8-9 at the time of the recording, I should say, of that space. And you had multiple former players show up to say, hold on a second, right? Like Alan Ray is 17 years removed from a Villanova uniform, right? Like Colin Gillespie is now 1, right? Like Jalen Brunson is 5 years removed from a Villanova uniform. He's already played for, he's played for 2 separate teams already since Villanova, right? Like, and basically was asked to, hey, the Knicks came to him and say, hey, can you like do the culture thing here? Right? Like that was like half of the reason why he was signed. Like obviously he's an excellent basketball player who works really hard, but like it was like kind of like, hey, we need you to like actually establish New York Knicks basketball culture.
Knicks don't do really work hard. It's not like a thing.
Yeah. The Knicks are the team who say 20 minutes is good enough. Right? But that's what they came for. And there was Colin, like on road trips with their teams or just coming home from a basketball game or like coming home from a practice and saying, there's a Twitter space hosted by a couple of ragtag fans who record themselves talking. And we're going to come and talk to the other fans because we want people to understand that, hey, like, I know it's not great right now, but like, you got to let this process play out because trust me, this is how the process has to work in order for us to get where we want to be and be sustainably good at this level. Now, so my point in all of this is to say that like, if you really have that culture that differentiates yourself, they talk all about the time. Jay talked all the time about the Villanova basketball family, which I'm sure is a concept that he was told by Raleigh Massimino, right? Like I'm confident that came from him. When you talk to Jay, he will talk about going for pasta dinners at Raleigh Massimino's house and talking hoops until 3 o'clock in the morning after a game or whatever, right? Like all of that stuff, I think plays a role. Like I really do believe that like you have to have all of those little elements. Villanova does. Calipari can go out, drop a bunch of bags, or at least used to drop a bunch of bags and put together a team that's going to compete in the top 20 every year. Villanova's not going to do that, right? Like that's just not how it's going to be. So what else differentiates you? So I think the culture comment for Villanova is different than it is for other programs. So I get your point. No one's going to give a shit about Villanova if it doesn't come with winning 20, 25 games a year and making Sweet 16s with some regularity, right? Like, and then if you make Sweet 16s with some regularity, then you knock on doors of Elite Eights and Final Fours and championships every so often. No one will talk about it without that. But just because people won't talk about it doesn't mean that you have to not commit to that because that is your calling card. It's how your bread is buttered, is you have to start there in order to kind of build that foundation for success.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Like, and I started with culture definitely begets winning. I think it's interesting the Villanova culture itself being what it is. I think where I don't know, where I'm just kind of at is like, you mean a lot of really good points. I think at the end of the day where I'm at is like, what if it was just a different culture? Would there be winning? Or, what if it was instead of like,
It
maybe
could
it's not one and done, but maybe our culture is more similar to like, I don't know, like Purdue's, we go find a bunch of tall people
Totally.
and and then like you still are able to find winning at that level, so I don't.
Purdue on the wall is like tall. That's
what it says. Matt Painter has decided
tall,
to just get tall
farmer,
people.
Rebound. Ridiculous.
But like, I guess.
But
Willie,
I love your point. It's a good point.
Willie, to your point though, look at Duke, right? Like,
yeah.
I think Duke, when Krzyzewski started at Duke, it was a very much a similar concept to where Villanova was at in the last 5 years, right? Like, or last 10 years, right? Like, that was kind of Duke, like Duke basketball, or whatever. And over time, it evolved, kind of came the brotherhood. But Christian Laettner wasn't like what the guys are now, right?
No.
Like Bobby Hurley wasn't what they have now, right? Like, and so over time, Coach K adjusted the culture and said, okay, we're still going to have a baseline
to Rob's
culture.
point, it evolves.
Right, it evolves. We're still going to have a baseline culture, but we do this. Now, Duke was Duke by the time that they did that, right? So you got to a point where had
more Villanova.
But I agree. You get to a point where you had a certain number of national championships. You had ESPN backing you, like sucking you off all the fucking time, right? Like Dickie V was nicknamed Dookie V. Like it was all like a thing, and so they could I want to say it was easy, but it was easier for Duke in that environment to kind of be that thing. Yeah. Whereas, and as a result, now Duke has fans from everywhere, right? Like in a way that Villanova has been awesome, has been a better program than Duke for the last 10 years since Coach K, by the way, since Coach K made that shift, Villanova was a better program.
Yeah.
Like, so like there is that element of like, okay, like, is that the way that we should go? I don't think it is.
No part of this is me saying we should switch what we're doing.
No, I agree. Yeah. I know you're not saying that, but point is that like, okay, like you can shift and that might be what you need to do. And you should shift with the times, but like, where's your baseline? Right. Like, and so that's really the comment.
Yeah.
Really the question.
Right.
We're just over an hour. So I guess we get into a Providence preview.
Hard transition.
It's great. We just had these two really really high level, in-depth conversations around like the state of college basketball in Villanova within that picture. Now let's talk about Providence on Sunday.
Providence? You mean the Eagles game?
Yeah, I was about to say.
Which, by the way, is still on Sunday. It's now official.
Providence is led by Brock Purdy, 7th round pick out of Iowa State.
So Providence and Villanova tip off noon on Sunday. That is now fully confirmed as we're about to jump on this podcast. The athletics department made a press release that say it's on. There will be some different ways of getting there. They're going to release more information.
Submarines.
You can get into that one bar at 10 a.m. You can get into that one bar at 10 a.m. on that east side. And then they'll start letting people in everywhere else at 10:30. So a little half hour earlier. I guess that's to try and encourage early attendance or early arrivals, so to speak, to try and mitigate some of the expected traffic and craziness with the tailgating and the NFC championship.
So it's just more time for people to drink. Got it.
That parking lot is going to be a mess.
Wild. It's going to be crazy.
I'm going to
make a comment. If the game is over within 5 gameplay minutes of the game ending, right? Like, I give hereby permission to Eagles fans, which, by the way, I never do. We're not even. I don't think Willie, are
I'm
you
a
an Eagles fan?
very big Eagles
All right,
fan.
Willie's
so
an Eagles
yeah.
fan, but Rob and I are definitely not an Eagles fan. Rob's wife is an Eagles fan, but like I give permission.
I was
for
gonna
you
say I already discussed this with Nicole earlier, so I'm ready for your take, and I
Yeah.
have a counter for it already.
I give
So
you
please.
permission to leave when the game ends and get yourself situated to go, or when the game's over analytically, not when the 40 minutes expires.
All right, just stop, because
Yeah.
Nicole and I literally discussed this at dinner earlier, and she's basically like, look, she's obviously a diehard Villanova fan. She's a diehard Eagles fan. Girl's been with me like for every Villanova game. She's like, but she grew up like an Eagles fan, right? The priority is the Eagles. Like, as much as we want to make this about Villanova, Villanova is 10-10, and we're playing Providence. The Eagles are in the NFC Championship.
This is my point.
Her take, no, but it's not like, oh, you have permission to leave. Her take is like, nobody's going to be at the fucking Villanova game because they're going to be tailgating, or they're going to leave at halftime at 1:00, so I can go tailgate for 2 hours. Like, that's where the priority is. So like, let's just set the expectations here, because that's what we like to do on this podcast. Like, sure, show up to the Villanova game, support your Wildcats against Providence Friars, but let's be real. Like, the priority for Philadelphia is the Eagles right now.
If Villanova was a real one, what we would do is, 10 o'clock, 10:30, you're at D6, drink your heart out. We go play Providence, tips off at 12. By the 13-minute mark of the second half, Villanova's up 25. It's amazing.
That's right.
I don't know how we're doing it. We're shooting the lights out. Ed Cooley's freaking out. You can leave. We'll win by 11, and then it'll be all about Jalen Hurts. That's what I'm speaking into existence. A Villanova blowout win over Providence, and then an Eagles blowout win over the 49ers.
Saint Cam, make it happen.
What they should do is let all Villanova fans stay there and immediately turn the broadcast on for the Eagles game. Leave the concession stands open, like leave the bars open. Like, hey, if you're going to be
overflow,
there, you're there.
Wells Fargo overflow.
People will be sloppy. Could you
get
imagine
ugly.
that? Oh my gosh.
Guess what?
That river of pee under the overpass is going to be a flood.
The Delaware and Schuylkill rivers will be overflowed.
Oh my God, so good.
All right. So Providence. All right, so we talked about that. So Providence.
Are we going to win?
I'm going to say yes. And I'm not going to say yes out of abundance of real confidence here, but like, I do think that in the last two games, even though it was ugly and whatever, I do think I saw this team come together in a way that I hadn't seen them come together. And so I do think that we finally get a win over a ranked opponent at home, which is what we've been talking about all season long, that you need to have in order to finally put together a tournament resume. It's too late for that, but Villanova's still into it. These guys are absolutely locked in still. And I got to give them a ton of credit with how they competed for each other and what have you over the last game. So Providence does all the same things, right? Providence is Bryce Hopkins, and they have some good pieces around him. Ed Croswell is a year improved.
Devin Carter's a really good player.
Bynum's been shaky, but maybe starting to potentially maybe turn a corner. He's had some injury trouble, but I think he's going to get there. Providence has a lot of good pieces, and the best piece outside of Hopkins is Ed Cooley, who may be the best coach in the conference. And I say maybe only because there's other really good coaches in the conference, like Sean Miller, right? But only one could say they are the reigning national coach of the year, and that's Ed Cooley. So Ed Cooley might be their best asset. Now, Providence kind of plays like I don't want to say a muck it up style of game, but they might play a muck it up style of offense. A lot of their offense is like getting to the free throw line. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they lead the conference and probably towards the top end of the country in free throw is taken. Right? Like, they get to the line a lot. Bryce Hopkins is in some ways kind of what you think Cam Whitmore can be or should be, in a lot of different respects. Like, Cam Whitmore with experience in college might play a little bit more like Bryce Hopkins. He attacks, he slashes, he gets in there, he creates contact. He gets to the line a ton. He finishes pretty well, very well. He's just a very good, athletic, and kind of a bully of a player on the court. And they've centered their offense around that, and it's really worked out well for them. So I really like the way this Providence team competes. And the fact that they get to the line a lot kind of guarantees them a baseline of kind of always being in games, because they're always able to do that and kind of dictate tempo and what have you as a result of that. So he's going to be a problem. He's definitely going to be a problem for us. And the Cam Whitmore Hopkins matchup, to the extent that they're matched up on each other, will be really cool and interesting.
It will be. I think, I mean, for anyone who missed Hopkins was at Kentucky, was part of like, the classic Calipari pulls in five-star players. Hopkins was one of the ones that just like quite couldn't figure it out in year one. But because Kentucky's always doing that, always pulling in 5 stars, he was kind of pushed out of the wayside for like Chris Livingston and then also a bunch of transfers. And he found a home in Providence, and he's showing out. The one thing about Providence, like you said, Chris, like definitely muck it up, is I'm going to say this, even though I just said it, we're going to blow them out jokingly. They play a game that's like they're always going to be in it. I mean, especially at home, but like they're always going to be in it. Providence has a little bit of a magic to them where it's just like, it's not always a win, but you're always going to be like, they're just tough. Providence is just tough sons of bitches. That's just what it is. To the free throw rate comment, Seton Hall is actually ahead of Providence in free throw rate, but Seton Hall is 10th in the country. Providence is 15th. So they're still right there. But on the positive side, or I guess the negative side, realistically, is Providence also really doesn't foul you. Providence is 45th, in the country in free throw rate defense, meaning that like they do not foul at all, which is a little bit frustrating for a Villanova team that, when we get to the line, outside of the last 2 games, we haven't been hitting. I mean, we haven't been hitting that well. We're shooting like 80% the last 2 games, but it's just not our normal like 88, which is, where we were a full percentage above a record that we set last year. But it's going to be a good game. I like the Hopkins Whitmore matchup. I think what a big part of it is how we handle Noah Locke and Jared Bynum, especially when they're on the court together. Devin Carter, I feel like, even though he's a guard, functionally, he like operates as a wing-ish for them. Functionally, he's still a guard. But I think the big question is just going to be on like how we handle Noah Locke and Jared Bynum. And then I mean, I'll take Eric Dixon over every center in the country.
I take Eric Dixon over Ed Croswell, but
yeah.
Whereas last year it was like when Nate Watson, Eric Dixon, and Ed Croswell kind of were in games, it was like Ed was kind of playing up to Nate, so to speak, right? Yeah. Like this year, Eric's ahead of Ed Croswell, but Ed has, I don't want to say closed the gap because Eric's been awesome, but like Ed Croswell, is credit to him. He had a really good offseason, developed really well in Kentucky's system. Yeah. I mean, in Providence's system. So I definitely give him credit for that.
And then obviously the big advantage is, this is not a disparagement, like you said, to Knapp, but Cooley. What's the game plan? Because Ed's going to have something just special cooked up, because Ed just is a great coach.
Yeah. I think when fans watch this game, they're going to be sitting there and thinking to themselves, it's like an ugly, but better executed game than St. John's. I don't know how to say it better than that. Like it's good. It'll be ugly. It'll be mucked up, but it would be good basketball execution more frequently than not, as opposed to like St. John's game. It was ugly and bad basketball execution. Right? Like I think it'll be more along those lines. I think there's going to be a feeling that like, hey, Villanova can win this game. Like we can, like we have the talent on the floor to do this if we can make the plays down the stretch that we need to. So I think, again, it's going to be a game that kind of comes down to the final 8 to 10 minutes. I think it's going to be tight late. St. Providence has run away from a couple teams, but it's only when they've gone like superhero ball, like with like versus UConn. There's like, that's a rivalry that they were just like waiting for them to come in. Yeah. Like, I don't know if that happens to us. And it doesn't, I don't think it happens to us at home. So this is a game where I feel like, hey, our guys are going to have this circled. It's ranked opponent. Providence figures right now, they're looking like a 6 seed. in the NCAAs, and candidly, a lot of people feel like they are, and by the analytics, by the way, they are better than their last year's team. So this is a really game Providence team. I think our team is going to be really amped up to play after a week of practice, after a couple good culture wins. I really do kind of like our ability to game plan for this and actually put together a pretty competitive contest. And it's going to come down to those last 5 to 10 possessions, which I will say, the last 2 games we got the better hand of. So this is why I think that I just have this feeling that, just like I had a feeling around Temple at the very beginning of the season, I have this feeling that Villanova is going to get this one.
I hope so. I mean, that would be, I mean, our best one of the season, and a just step in the right direction I would say for the first time, realistically. A real step in the right direction.
I was gonna say I've got Nova on like kind of a fluke win, but call it what it is. Some Philly magic on Saturday, whatever day it is, Sunday.
The vibes will be immaculate going into the Eagles game for Villanova and Eagles fans if Villanova wins. Although some Eagles fans, they're also so fucking superstitious that they'll be like, "Oh no, Villanova won." Now I don't know how that portrays into like
me.
Eagles
That's
game.
Literally me. This entire conversation, I was like, I don't know if we win, are the Eagles gonna fucking win? I don't know.
It's such like an Eagles fan way of thinking.
I every time I'm silent, that's what I'm thinking about. I was like, I don't know. Do I want us to win?
Meanwhile, after the Villanova St. John's game the other night, there was "Let's Go Giants" fans, "Let's Go Giants" chants in the in MSG.
And you see how that worked out for them?
Yeah, but that's like the New York fans versus like New York fans to get one win. They're like, "Oh, we're gonna win everything now because we're the best," right? Like Philly fans are like, "Oh God damn it, we won something here, so now God's gonna fuck us the other way," and it's just somehow things the way they think is great. I love that. All right, guys, I don't have anything else. Are we good?
I think that's it.
Good.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for listening. We'll be back after the Providence game with some more things. I don't know. Maybe I'll throw a space together at some other point in time. It's a long week. It's a long time to be off in the middle of the season. So we'll see. We'll see how it all goes. But good luck to you Eagles fans. This upcoming weekend. I don't think that there's too many 49ers fans, so I'm not going to wish.
Can't imagine. No.
Yeah, I'm going to pander.
And even if there are, fuck them.
Fuck them. I'm pandering hardcore to my base.
That's right.
Although there's Giants fans out there who are probably like, "What are you doing?" But too bad, you lost.
Yeah, not a winner.
So
we don't celebrate loser culture.
That's right. That's right. Well said. Way to tie it all together. With all that said, thank you everybody for listening, and as always, let's go Nova.